Black Myth Wukong is causing outrage. Few games this year have been talked about quite to the extent of this one, which is unsurprising really, considering that it's managed to sell over 10 million copies in just its first month on the market alone. While many gamers are already proclaiming this impressive looking title to be the game of the year, it would be next to impossible not to notice the amount of controversy and drama circulating online around this game. The rabbit hole connected to this one goes extremely deep, so join me as I attempt to put the pieces together and examine why people in the West at both ends of the political spectrum have been at each other's throats regarding this game's existence. The discourse is generating an uproar across the internet, so I'm going to try my best to not only make sense of this situation for myself, but hopefully give some of you a clearer idea of what has unfolded too. I am Lady Decade, and this is the incredibly convoluted story of the Black Myth Wukong drama. Black Myth Wukong. You've probably heard all about it by now, but if you've somehow been living under a wok for these last few months, Black Myth Wukong is an action-adventure role-playing game developed by the Chinese indie game studio Game Science. Previously only primarily responsible for making simple mobile games, this huge title has shocked the world by quickly establishing itself as the biggest and best quality Chinese video game that has ever been made. The industry seems to have come a long way since the days of Seven Grandad. Nightmare fuel. As for Black Myth Wukong, the game is inspired by the classic Chinese novel A Journey to the West, the same source material responsible for the creation of Dragon Ball and, if you're really old and can remember it, Monkey. That's right. Monkey's back, and this time, he's Game of the Year. That's what I call monkey magic. This means the protagonist is based on the legendary figure Sun Wukong, also known as the Monkey King. This character is famous for his incredible strength, magical powers, and a rebellious spirit. The game has garnered attention for its impressive graphics and animations, which showcase a high level of detail and a rich, immersive world. It features combat that blends traditional Chinese mythology with fluid, dynamic mechanics, allowing players to use a variety of magical abilities and transformations characteristic of Sun Wukong's powers in folklore. We got a lot to discuss around this groundbreaking game, but what I'll mention is that if you like the look of it and want to try it for yourself, I can get you a big discount on the game using my affiliate link via the pinned comment. Get up to 90% off thousands of games and support the voice of an independent creator simultaneously by using my affiliate links. Happy shopping. Black Myth Wukong is a game that many feel delivers the perfect level of entertainment. It's a great looking game to play with a fun premise, so what is there to actually even be angry about? Well, to begin answering that loaded question, first I want to take you back to an article published and written by IGN this time last year. In this piece titled How Black Myth Wukong Developers' History of Sexism is Complicating Its Journey to the West, the online game industry news giant went into great detail, providing as many reasons as possible to disincentivize people from buying this game in the future, highlighting what they deem to be as problematic behavior by the developers behind this game, painting a picture that they are misogynistic and sexist individuals. The article fits the very definition of a hit piece, with the journalists, or should I say activists, responsible digging through nearly 2 decades of social media posts, attempting to paint the people behind the game in as bad a light as possible. What's really astounding is the article is longer and has more effort put into it than the vast majority of their game reviews. A concerted effort indeed to discredit a game which was, at the time, a whole year away from release. Despite publishing an article with a headline promising that it will highlight the Wukong developers' history of sexism, nothing in the piece directly demonstrates such a defamatory claim, with instead we get thousands of words grasping at straws, providing us with nothing more than conjecture and offence at crude jokes and vulgarity. So let's break down what seems to have offended the IGN activists so very badly that they had to sift through 16 years worth of social media posts to destroy a game developer's reputation. So let's dig into what was highlighted. They would point out that several posts have surfaced from the Chinese social media website Weibo, written by individuals from the studio, that contain multiple references to genitalia and sexual innuendos. They go on to claim that these very posts have provoked a backlash among some in the games community, many of whom are women. Before showing any evidence of this, they attempt to pair this outrage with the fact that they report that Game Science in 2015 produced what they personally deem to be offensive recruitment posters for the studio, claiming that such material culturally ingrained sexism into the company, which we will discuss more in a moment. More insanely, rather than speak with any women who have worked or at least associated with Game Science, instead, in their own words, IGN spoke to several women familiar with gaming culture, and, in the eyes of many female players, Game Science has a notably negative reputation, said Jen, pseudonym, a Chinese games designer who's now based outside of China. I admire their dedication and work. I had high expectations for their game until I came across their misogynistic remarks around 2021, which was reported in the news. Basically, they did the Chinese equivalent of interviewing anonymous Twitter users who have no connection to the game and asking for their opinions without gathering genuine evidence, and then reporting opinions as facts. As you may have just picked up on, Jen doesn't even reside in China, let alone work with or for Game Science. So straight away, at no point did they manage to speak with anyone who suffered firsthand any misogyny or sexism working for Game Science, just internet users who were offended by social media posts. So I guess we ought to look at these incredibly sexist and misogynistic posts, which are so horrendous that they are being reported on by IGN, some of which were more than a decade old when IGN dug them out. They first head back to 16 years before the article was written to highlight comments made by Feng Ji, one of Game Science's co-founders. They write, Feng in particular has an outsized presence within the games industry, with a penchant for sharing introspective insights on game development, peppered with crude metaphors and boorish innuendos. In 2007, he penned a lengthy article titled "Who Has Murdered Our Game?", where he delved into the difficulties of game development in China. Feng compared failed projects to stillborn babies, given that many games had to cease development despite being worked on for a year or so. He then brought up this analogy. Is it because the sperm isn't virile enough? Is the pregnancy too short? Is the baby lacking nutrition? Are the doctors in charge of cesarean sections lowly skilled? Why can't we produce a healthy child product? IGN would provide no further context regarding this particular quote, as it's obviously neither sexist nor misogynistic, whichever way you look at it. At best, it's a vulgar comparison to make, so I guess they're highlighting this to make him look as bad as possible, as it doesn't relate to the perceived issue. The funny thing is that if you go to their source and find the quote before he even makes the audacious comparison, he acknowledges that his statement is indeed cruel, but he felt it was an appropriate metaphor to describe his devastation as a game developer of cancelled projects. As a mother, I do think that comparing the two is ridiculous, but who am I to tell him what he can and cannot feel or write in his article? That's the job of the Chinese government. Jokes aside, I'll dive into that aspect later, but by the way, on the subject of vulgarity, let's just remember for a moment that this article wasn't penned in 2023. Feng wrote this in 2007. IGN had to go back that far to try and tarnish Feng's name. China has a different culture from us altogether. In 2024, the majority of the world actually considers the West to be the most vulgar culture on Earth. For a moment, let's wind things back to 2007 when Feng penned that emotional article. One of the most popular shows on American TV was 2.5 Men, a sitcom starring a literal cocaine-addicted actor, and was known for its humour centred around gender stereotypes, promiscuity, and often derogatory jokes about women and various ethnic groups. For the record, I don't find anything offensive about 2.5 Men now, nor did I back then. But edgy humour was very much still on vogue back then, so if you're going to cancel this developer, then you'll need to cancel the entire Western entertainment medium whilst you're at it. There was none of this culture war bollocks back back then. After bringing up this old nonsense that has no relevance to the conversation whatsoever, IGN would finally show us a Weibo post from 2020 that finally relates to Feng's time working on Black Myth Wukong. The post was largely about Feng's high level of criticism against himself, wishing that what had gone viral showcasing progress on the game could have been better. But once again, it would be the arguably vulgar and dark jokes that IGN would take issue with. Joking regarding improving the game's quality, Feng would comment, "I want to expand my circle and hire more people, get licked until I can't get an erection." Several lines down, he also added, "I know you just happen to be a little depressed. It is my honour to provide you with some comfort in the lower half of your body. I got wet after watching it a couple of times. The pressure in my crotch is immense." Once again, that's not misogyny or sexism, that's just vulgarity. Using this as a base, despite there being no misogyny or sexism that I can find in any of these statements, IGN goes on to write, "These crude expressions and the culture of sexism also seem to extend to the rest of game science as well, even prior to the studio's founding. In a 2014 annual meeting held at Tencent, members of the Azura Online team, some of them being the co-founders of game science, produced a video that poked fun at the imagined plight of its team after the game was shut down. In this video, a few male employees were depicted as adult film actors and a rapist after they lost their jobs, whereas some of its female staff had to work as nightclub hostesses and foot bath attendants. Tencent declined to comment for this piece. Once again, this article gets more and more ridiculous. It's all about the same sort of stuff, dark, edgy, vulgar humour. That's not the same as sexism or misogyny. In fact, isn't that a joke of equality? As that's at the equal expense of both male and female employees. The mind boggles. In an attempt to build their game science nothing burger even bigger and juicier, IGN finally brought up the recruitment posters they mentioned at the start of the article, which apparently IGN has seen and verified but doesn't want to show us. Like Sega and most video game magazine publications of the 90s, in their recruitment campaign, Game Science brought their edgy humour to the forefront, making it clearly obvious to anyone who wanted to work for them from the start what kind of humour and culture they have within the company. IGN states, in one poster, a risque illustration that resembles the artwork of Austrian artist Egon Schiele is accompanied by a header that says mandatory self-pleasure. In another poster that featured the rear view of a woman, the ad reads, "Don't screw your colleagues." In the same ad, friends with benefits were also implied as an office perk. And a third poster featuring a dumbbell is far more pointed, with the ad stating that fatties should f off. Attitudes are different in China, but in all seriousness, these are clearly jokes. And if I had to work for other people, I would prefer to work for people with a sense of humour, who didn't take themselves seriously, rather than overly corporate entities who belittle staff by embarrassingly sending them on sensibility training courses and forcing them to navigate through a thicket of political correctness at every turn. I know where I would be more relaxed, but according to IGN, having a sense of humour is a problem. I'll be honest, I think a lot of the posts that IGN are pointing out to be problematic are just plain funny. Look at this one, for example, that they took issue with. I was nearly crying laughing when I saw this one. The snake spirit is different from what I imagined, but if I cover the bottom half with my hand, it's still possible to jerk off. It's amazing, it's so good. Apart from that, a massive portion of the IGN diatribe isn't so much even targeted at game science, but at sexism in general across the whole Chinese video game industry, and complaining that the Chinese government stamp out feminism. I, for one, am not one to argue that there wouldn't be a problem regarding the treatment of women in China. From an outsider's perspective looking in at least, it's not just women who have no right to voice their thoughts and opinions against the country, the government and how things are done, but every single citizen who lives under the tyranny of the CCP. So I understand why someone might feel a bit aggrieved regarding the way the people of China are treated. However, I don't think it's fair to victimize a couple of game developers responsible for seemingly nothing more than cracking a few jokes that some deem vulgar. IGN essentially dedicated 4,000 words to building a straw man argument. All that huge effort, and they provided zero tangible evidence of actual sexism or misogyny committed by game science developers. The whole article feels like a crucifixion over nothing. See what I did there? I made a vulgar comparison for effect. Cancel me! The article, although raising some eyebrows at the time amongst some onlookers, went largely unnoticed by many, but the controversy would begin to pick up some steam after cross-pollinating with other internet drama. Earlier this year, a story circulated that game publishers were hiring a consultancy company known as Sweet Baby Inc. to assist with DEI in their games. The Sweet Baby debacle is quite convoluted, so I recommend watching my in-depth video on the subject after you finish this one. However, during the period when Sweet Baby was a hot topic, another story circulated online. It suggested that the negative press Black Myth Wukong received from IGN was due to the Chinese company's refusal to pay $7 million to Sweet Baby Inc. This refusal was allegedly because Sweet Baby Inc. wanted to be hired to incorporate DEI initiatives into the game, which the company declined. One gaming news account on X, known as Pirate Nation, would circulate a translated tweet that was allegedly from the Chinese media. It read, "The reason why the team behind Black Myth Wukong has been subjected to persistent sexist attacks and slander since their first promotional video is because they have consistently refused political correctness guidance and rejected the extortionate guidance fees of millions of dollars demanded by these political correctness teams." Actually, such teams are quite common in Europe and America. They interfere with works like Assassin's Creed, Dying Light 2, Stay Human, and God of War by pushing for politically correct female protagonists. These changes are the direct result of the interference and guidance of such teams. Game science teams refuse to communicate with these groups and reject their interference. Most importantly, they refuse to pay the exorbitant $7 million in guidance fees. This is the direct reason why they are being attacked and slandered. Some justifications are based on the team's lack of diversity or representation, which doesn't align with the political correctness standards. A typical example is an article by a major IGN writer criticizing Hogwarts Legacy and refusing to evaluate or promote it due to its alleged lack of political correctness. It's widely believed, though, that this story is fake news, as no credible source has been able to substantiate this story. One thing which is 100% real, though, is the existence of the IGN article, which would begin to receive a lot of negative attention and additional backlash after this rumour was spread, which helps promote the Sweet Baby / Black Myth Wukong conspiracy. In August 2024, Black Myth Wukong would finally hit shelves, proving to be a smash hit despite IGN dragging the game's reputation through the mud during the previous year. Within days of release, That Park Place would report on Asmongold clips relating to the infamous article and the original writing showcased for Feng Ji. It states, "A clip from Asmongold Clips notes that Feng Ji's comment is a used idiom in the Chinese language, as a colloquial expression used humorously or sarcastically to describe a situation where excessive flattery or sycophancy has an overwhelming and paralyzing effect on someone. The use of such metaphors can be found in informal speech on social media." So, beyond being neither sexist nor misogynistic, like I pointed out myself, apparently, according to this source at least, when not translated directly to English, the statements are less vulgar too. Asmongold also suggested that the posts were intentionally translated in the most uncharitable way possible to help push the narrative that the developer is sexist and misogynistic. Rebecca Valentine, who worked on the controversial article the previous year, would soon have a statement attached to IGN's Black Myth Wukong preview article from June 2024. While she would agree with the previewer that it is indeed a great game, she would double down on her sexism allegations. Black Myth Wukong looks like it'll be a great game. It's gorgeous, with snappy combat, fantastic monster design, and some really interesting boss fights. It is also true that several of the people who are making it have made disparaging remarks about women and don't seem to be interested in either retracting their past statements or in supporting the numerous women who are being harassed in online conversations about Black Myth Wukong purely for expressing their discomfort with those statements. Both of these ideas can exist simultaneously. What audiences want to do about this conflict is ultimately their choice. Adding some cringe-worthy jargon you would only hear from the likes of a Californian or their ilk, she adds, "I didn't see any women or femme-coded characters in the demo, and I was able to confirm from Game Science that there was none present in the section of the game presented to the press." Doubling down on her perception that misogynists must have made this video game. I still haven't seen any conclusive evidence that supports this very strong opinion though. But I have seen the Snake Lady. While having no real evidence that the makers of the game were sexist, this did not prevent Tom Regan, a journalist from The Guardian, from opting to perpetuate further the sexism narrative that Rebecca had started. Game Science flatly refused to answer Tom's questions about the allegations, with Tom adding, "It is disappointing that Game Science is opting to invite journalists to speak to them and play the game, but refusing to answer their questions. Perhaps there is no reassurance to offer." Failing to say anything at all, Game Science is also failing to distance itself and its game from the multiple crude, disparaging and misogynistic comments attributed to its employees and leadership. Again, what misogynistic comments? At this stage, I can see potentially why Game Science are ignoring this. These activists probably look like fools to them by making completely baseless claims with no evidence. GameSpot would choose to peddle the sexism narrative too, adding, "It should be noted that allegations against Game Science have surfaced over the years via reports of the developer fostering a sexist culture and work environment, with numerous women in the Chinese gaming community highlighting these problems within the studio, as well as backlash following crude and controversial social media posts by Game Science co-founder Ji Feng." With their article linking back to the Guardian article, which in turn links back to the IGN article, creating a whole chain regurgitating the same ridiculous story, which, as I said earlier, all appears to be based on people reporting opinion as facts, without having any genuine facts or evidence in place. Essentially, if misogyny were a criminal act, these journos wouldn't be able to put a case together to present to a judge to prove it. While you might think the Black Myth Wukong controversy had ended, a new wave of drama soon hit the internet. Stories began circulating that Game Science was banning content creators who had received game keys from including politics, feminist propaganda and other similar content in their coverage of the game. That Park Place highlighted a tweet from an X account known as Legal Mindset, run by an X user known as Andrew Esquire, who works as a legal analyst. The agreement informs content creators that they cannot insult other influencers or players, and that they are not to use any offensive language or humour. It then notes that they cannot include politics, violence, nudity, feminist propaganda, fetishization, and other content that instigates negative discourse. Furthermore, it also bans trigger words such as quarantine or isolation or COVID-19 and prevents creators from discussing content related to China's game industry policies, news, etc. While it must be said that a few of these terms relate specifically to the fact that it's a game being produced in China and would therefore need to satisfy the Chinese government's own dubious censorship requirements, as an influencer myself who has been given dozens upon dozens of keys myself in the past, most Western publishers likewise place restrictions on what can or cannot be said within related content. This is normal. Repeat. This is completely normal. It's madness that this particular aspect has even picked up any traction, bearing in mind that the streamers reporting this would be in the same position as me and would certainly know this. This situation feels incredibly agenda-driven. The outrage this generated would result in the story going as far as even being picked up by the bloody BBC. They would largely comment on the game's success but report on the controversy that Ahead of Black Myth's release, some content creators and streamers revealed that a company affiliated with its developer had sent them a list of topics to avoid talking about while live streaming the game, including feminist propaganda, fetishization, and other content that instigates negative discourse. The BBC would add, while it's not clear what precisely was meant by feminist propaganda, a widely circulated report by video game publication IGN in November alleged a history of sexist and inappropriate behaviour from employees of Game Science, the studio behind Black Myth. One thing is highly likely, through the lens of the Chinese government, that the highly criticised IGN article by Rebecca Valentine that featured zero concrete facts to substantiate her claims could have certainly been interpreted by the CCP as feminist propaganda. And as you know, these communists want to be as disassociated from as many Western values as possible. This, however, does not mean that they do not have a problem with feminism, but what it does mean is that they do have a huge problem with Western propaganda and its potential influence and perceived damage to their carefully curated Chinese culture. In fact, to put it into perspective about how much they want to control things in their own country, they have what's known as state feminism already in place. After all, this does make sense considering that China is a communist region and a core value of communism, no matter how poorly implemented it is in practice, is, of course, equality. The CCP's state feminism espouses gender equality in the context of their socialist development policies. On a basic level, this state-sponsored feminism aligns with the goals of the ruling Communist Party and does not necessarily address feminist concerns, particularly those brought up by radical feminism or Western feminism as they view it, which demands more profound societal changes than the state is willing to endorse or implement. That's not Game Science's fault, and I think is incredibly unfair and incredibly uneducated and foolish for that matter to attack Game Science about this when they can only work within the confines of the legal system they reside in. But then again, this is all irrelevant really, as the only gotchas IGN managed to put forward regarding Game Science was digging up perceived crude jokes from over a decade ago, which didn't even back up their stringy narrative they failed to weave. Going back to the BBC article, they would add that multiple content creators refused to review the game, claiming its developers were trying to censor discussion and stifle freedom of speech, with others choosing to directly defy the warnings. I just want to add that if these developers are apparently stifling free speech by attaching terms and conditions when handing out game keys, then many Western and Japanese developers are guilty of the same censorship. And you could argue this is worse because it's not state-sanctioned like it is for Chinese companies. The companies located within democratic countries who carry out these practices literally do it for the purpose of greed. I'm sure you can imagine the restrictions Nintendo would put in place when dealing with influencers. They would never touch someone like me with a barge pole. They even terminated Beat 'em Up Woods in the past, and he's a very safe and vanilla chappy compared to me. They would also report that one creator with the username MoonMoon launched a Twitch stream of Black Myth titled COVID-19 Isolation Taiwan is a Real Country Feminism Propaganda, with another streamer, Rui Zhong, discussing China's one-child policy on camera while playing the game. They also noted that as recently as late August 2024, Chinese social media platform Weibo banned 138 users who were deemed to be violating its guidelines when discussing Black Myth Wukong. Later that parkplace.com would comment that someone from Game Science would finally respond to the sexism allegations. Fei Fi would address the comments made in the past by co-founder Ji Feng. The article states, Fei Fi indicates this post came in the wake of a game demonstration for Black Myth Wukong to recruit talent for the game. She specifically notes that IGN mistranslated his, Ji Feng's, first sentence in the above post. She notes that what he, Ji Feng, was trying to convey in Chinese was, I just wanted to recruit a few people but received more praise than expected, which made me feel uneasy. She then stated, however, just because I understand what he was trying to say doesn't mean I approve of his way of saying it. You can call him rude and crude, but there's no need to label him as sexist. Fei Fi states exactly what I had also interpreted when reading Ji Feng's comments, and I didn't need to be Chinese to understand them. It's incredibly bad faith when journalists purposefully take people's comments out of context. In fact, Fei Fi, goes on to detail that there was significant Chinese backlash for these remarks. The backlash against them, Ji Feng, on the Chinese internet actually started at this point when the first video came out and wasn't anything new. Their inappropriate remarks from before were dug up and widely spread at this time. This spread reached beyond the gaming community, and every year since, whenever Ji Feng released a new video, it sparks another wave of criticism, with people arguing fiercely over it. IGN's report last year was late to the game. So basically, Ji Feng has already been suffering at the hands of the Chinese internet for all of this apparent wrongthink, and then has Western journalists taking issue with his colourful language and using it as an opportunity to bury him all over again. These journalists can sometimes be really nasty pieces of work who have no consideration for their thoughtless grandstanding. After the backlash and the online discourse all this drama was causing, it was only a matter of time before the writer of the original article, Rebecca Valentine, locked her X account and ceased communication with the online public. I guess in this case, what goes around comes around, eh? Speaking of these people, someone we haven't touched on in this video yet is her co-author of the infamous article who would work on translating Ji Feng's social media posts and other Chinese sources, Ki-Hoon Chan, who, according to the IGN site, only ever worked with the company on that one toxic article that has caused so many problems within the gaming community, has also come under fire recently. Now, what's really ironic about this is that despite making efforts to make someone else appear misogynistic and sexist via the exploitation of less than generously translated vulgar jokes, has recently been discovered to have a not so squeaky clean reputation himself. In fact, he appears to be very openly racist. This isn't a case of vulgar jokes and distasteful metaphors being portrayed as something more. This is a man just being full-on and openly disgustingly racist. This tweet, for example, from 2022, is much more recent than Ji Feng's post that they're criticizing, and it reads as, "Do I hate white people? Yes. And if you're a friend, you'll understand why this is never personal. I hate white privilege so much, their ability to scream reverse racism when faced with a tiny bit of criticism. The world revolves around them, even in Singapore, every day. Just imagine changing the word white to literally any other group of people. For example, gay people, black people, Jewish people, Islamic people, Chinese people. Using the word white doesn't change the context of this statement, it's just racist. Not reverse racist, just racist. Hating people because of their skin colour they didn't choose to have. And the second line, no person would accept being told, well, it's not personal, I hate your race, you're still my friend. What a psycho way of thinking. To think that it's okay to tweet stuff like that. It's like saying something like, you're pretty nice for a black person. That's a morally corrupt way of thinking. What's most ridiculous about this, these people are accusing game developers of being misogynistic and sexist based on their personal perception of jokes and metaphors, yet they're being openly racist in public. Where's everyone now reaching out to IGN for comments for publishing the work of an openly racist individual? Disgusting. The hypocrisy is incredible. As of today, this horrible little person is continuing to defend Rebecca Valentine and her poorly written hit piece that backfired right in her face. With her out of the picture now, while some might have felt this was the end of criticism around the politics surrounding the game, a journalist by the name of Tom Foley of Dot Esports, yes, this is another Tom, would publish another hit piece on a title that would send the internet into quite the frenzy, titled Black Myth Wukong's shameless lack of diversity is attracting the wrong type of fans. Oh yeah, by the way, while the article's title may sound utterly ridiculous, attacking a game about monkeys and all the other sweet animals, depressingly, this wasn't even the first time that idiotic journalists had attacked a game for not having enough focus on gender equality. When the game was making the rounds on the review sites, ScreenRant.com would downgrade Black Myth Wukong when reviewing the title due to them claiming that it largely lacks inclusion and representation. In Tom Foley's piece, he says that Black Myth Wukong's toxic audience bullied the Screen Rant journalists off the internet. A journalist whom I will add was another individual who directly chose to peddle IGN's highly criticised and curated narrative. I can't find the name of the journalist if you're wondering why I haven't named them, because Screen Rant have removed it from all of the related articles. Why bother having hot takes if you're not going to stand by them and then go into hiding? It's pathetic. So, the Screen Rant piece states, it's important to mention the controversies surrounding the game's studio and the reports of misogyny and sexism from developers. Playing as a female gamer allowed me to notice issues surrounding inclusion and representation. As far as chapters 1 and 2, while characters are clearly fictitious and fantastical creatures, there were no female or feminine NPCs, enemies or bosses present. The only exception, if you can call it female, is a boss named Mother of Stones in chapter 2, which is nothing more than a still glowing rock with no abilities being guarded by other enemies. They scathingly add that the lack of diversity and inclusivity resonates with the misogynistic comments reported to have been made by the developers, which expressed disdain for women playing their games. Although Black Myth Wukong does have truly enjoyable moments, the underlying feeling that women aren't welcome in this world felt present throughout my gameplay experience. So, men watching, tell me about how you felt excluded when playing Shantae, or Tomb Raider, or Metroid. Honestly, how do these people have jobs? As for this later hit piece against the game and its player base, Tom Foley of Esports would treat his reader base as though they're all pathetic little wimps in need of coddling like little bitches, with his opening line being, "We shouldn't be carrying hate into what should be a safe space for everyone." Whilst I'm all for a world of less hate, anyone who uses phrases seriously such as safe spaces is a weakling wet lettuce. In fact, to use this sort of person's own rhetoric against them, the term safe space should be considered an instant red flag that you're about to be exhausted by bullshit. In this article, which contains more red flags than the communist motherland China itself, Tom whines, "No one should ever face hate for doing their job." We agree then, Tom. So why should IGN journalists be allowed to aim so much hate at Chinese game developers just doing their jobs, Tom? Why the hypocrisy, Tom? The sheer hubris from these awful activist journos is astounding. The excruciatingly sheer lack of self-awareness is dazzling. They wonder why the internet continues to tear them apart when they make ridiculous contradictory statements like that. He goes on to say, this is all symptomatic of a wider problem that's damaging the industry we love. Yes, the journalists, them, their fault. They're the ones writing hit pieces and causing all of this division, and then acting all coy and confused at all the hate and drama they've caused. Jesus Christ, Tom! What the hell are you doing, Tom? You're moaning about the problem that you have helped create, you and your cohorts. In one fabulous effort to tell us all off, he writes, purely from a business perspective, diverse games appeal to more players, which can improve sales by helping developers tap into new markets. Diverse games feel more relatable to a broader audience and satisfy the community's growing demand for inclusivity in the industry. How many times does this opinion need to be challenged? The proof is generally always in the pudding. Where are these big properties? Anyway, you might really vehemently believe what you're writing, but 10 million people have bought this game in the first week. What Tom is basically doing is parroting propaganda he's fallen for. The whole article sounds like corporate jargon, but by his profile, he's only been a journalist since last year, so it's not surprising that his arguments are so shallow. Something that pains me to say is that this guy is a white guy who studied in the wealthy city of Edinburgh in Scotland with a degree in chemistry and used to work for AstraZeneca. I hate to refer to myself as a woman of colour with no education, but if we're boxing people and characters up via diversity of characteristics, like how Tom wants us to perceive the world, that's exactly what I am to him. Not who I am, what I am. It's very dehumanising. Tom's right about one thing, from a certain point of view. Diverse games appeal to more gamers, but are diverse in the experience they deliver, not bedroom preferences, gender, and skin colour. That's surface level bullshit that the radical fringe has an obsession with. If the general public is seeing buckets and buckets of different diversity in every Western produced AAA game, is not grinding their gears because they hate diversity itself. It's because the use of diversity in most games appears disingenuous, lacking in artistic integrity, and deployed with the sole purpose of presenting games in a certain way to make shareholders feel their investments are safe from lawsuits and criticism at the hands of litigious opportunists. Obviously, I know there are way more moving parts than this, but this video is getting very long now, and essentially what is safe for shareholders is often incredibly boring to many gamers because there are only so many times you've seen an unrealistically diverse cast until it becomes cliché, painfully predictable, and overly corporate. Online comment sections won't be able to put this as eloquently as I have, but generally speaking, that's why people celebrate games that feel less pandering to corporate needs. Also, generally speaking, the moment the activist journalists start moaning about a game, they've more or less sealed that game's success. Look at Stellar Blade. The fact that Western journalists have buried the developers over claims of sexism, misogyny, and a lack of diversity feels like an incredibly trivial reason to be angry with this game. When I first saw this discourse, I'd assumed it was backlash along the lines of Huawei and TikTok, with concerns about the Chinese government's access to data and interventions in the West and the rest of the world. This was a rare instance where I thought I would be siding with the journalists, as I thought there were going to be some really important issues brought up, which seemed to be largely ignored, but I was completely wrong. It's dumb really. I should have expected that they would be attacking individuals over dubious, at best, claims of bullshit rather than real journalism. After all, the Chinese government follows an authoritarian model. The country lacks free elections, and censorship and the suppression of dissent are completely normalised there. These are issues which are much broader than sexism and misogyny, so they're incredibly weird things to focus on considering how everything in the country is suppressed. To be honest, I could bash China all day. But that doesn't mean that I have a problem with individual game developers or even just normal people from there, nor do I feel not buying a video game from the second richest and second most powerful country on earth is going to in any way stifle the power and influence they already hold. At the end of the day, we already unfortunately live on a planet where Western governments led by Democrat Bill Clinton and supported by globalists such as Tony Blair and Angela Merkel decided it was a great idea to lift trade restrictions with China and allow a known authoritarian regime to become the manufacturing and electronics powerhouse that they are today. Aside from the censorship, we now have a superpower out there whose human rights record is alarming. The treatment of religious groups, the crackdown on freedom of expression, and particularly the oppressive measures against ethnic minorities like the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, are stark examples of governance that flies in the face of respect for human dignity. The ideological differences between the collectivist state-centric model employed by China and the individualistic market-driven approach most of us here in the West advocate are seriously profound and do not mix well. The country is full-on authoritarian communists. Communism and authoritarianism are massive problems, and they go hand in hand because there's no other way to make communism work. So if you're going to moan about anything Chinese, moan about a lack of freedom of expression, freedom of ownership, censorship, unelected governments, authoritarianism, social credits, communism, anything but a fucking game and developers making vulgar jokes is an insult to everyone's intelligence, and quite frankly, these Western journos should be ashamed. These journos sound like 14-year-olds trying to talk about geopolitics. So, ignore the noise. Accept that geopolitics is an incredibly complex and nuanced subject which, to be frank, even at points today I have massively oversimplified, and instead enjoy a game that doesn't pander and instead offers us a level of escapism that is becoming increasingly rare in this forever more divided world. Don't forget, my link in the pinned comment will get you a tidy discount. Oh, and all of you journo activists, see you next Tuesday.